The first thing Ethan Cole noticed that morning was the silence. Not the ordinary winter stillness that settled over the Wyoming plains every December, but a heavy, unsettling quiet that pressed against his ears as if the world were holding its breath. The kind of silence that made a man stop mid-step and listen, even when he didn't know what he was listening for. Snow had fallen overnight in thick, clean layers, smoothing the land into a white, unbroken sheet. The sky was pale, glowing faintly with the weak promise of a sun still hiding below the horizon. But the cold felt strange, sharp, metallic, almost watchful. Ethan zipped his coat higher against the wind and tightened his grip on the lead rope. Beside him walked his mare, Ember, her chestnut coat dusted in frost crystals that shimmered like tiny sparks in the dim morning light. She was usually calm at this hour, content to follow him to the lower pasture, but today her steps were restless. Her ears flicked repeatedly toward the frozen lake ahead, her head lifting, lowering, lifting again. Something had her attention, and that alone was unusual. Ember wasn't the nervous type. "Easy, girl," he murmured, running a gloved hand down her neck. Her muscles twitched beneath his palm, tense and alert. "We're just checking the fence line. Nothing out there but snow." But the mare didn't relax. As they approached the lake, she slowed, then stopped altogether, planting her hooves firmly into the crusted snow. Ethan followed her gaze toward the pale expanse of ice stretching out between the pines. The lake was a landmark he had known since childhood, a place he fished in the summers and skated on as a boy. Frozen solid from December through February. Safe, familiar. Nothing unusual about it. Except today, a strange imprint marred the center of the lake, dark against the glassy surface. At first, Ethan thought it was a shadow, perhaps the reflection of a cloud or the shape of a branch someone had dropped and left to freeze. But the closer he looked, the less sense it made. The shape wasn't random. It was too defined, too deliberate, almost as if something had been pressed against the ice from below. Ember snorted loudly, jerking her head and stepping sideways, trying to pull away from the lake. Ethan steadied her, frowning. "What's gotten into you?" But he could feel it too, an unease curling slowly, coldly, into his gut. He took a step closer to the lake's edge. Ember did not follow. Instead, she dug in harder, pulling back sharply, almost yanking the lead rope from his hand. Ethan turned to her, surprised. He'd owned this mare for 9 years. She'd carried him through storms, through brush fires, through hunts and long-distance treks. She never disobeyed without reason. And now she shook her head violently, eyes wide, breath steaming in frantic bursts. "Ember," he whispered, "it's just ice." But even as he said the words, he felt their hollowness. Because the shape under the ice, whatever it was, didn't belong there. And the silence, that eerie, suffocating quiet, felt less like stillness and more like a warning. He walked carefully to the shoreline, then crouched, squinting to get a better look. The imprint beneath the frozen surface was clearer from here. Not flat, not shallow, something three-dimensional, something big. Ethan exhaled slowly, his breath curling into mist. There were grooves where the ice had dipped inward, faint fractures radiating outward like the petals of a broken flower, as if something heavy had pressed up against the underside from below. He followed the lines with his eyes, down the length of the shape, across the faint ridge, the subtle rise, the unmistakable outline of. His breath caught, because he recognized it. It couldn't be, he told himself. It shouldn't be possible, but he knew the shape of a horse. Even beneath a foot of clear ice, distorted by light and depth, the form was unmistakable. The arc of the neck, the slope of the shoulder, the long line of a foreleg. A horse was beneath the lake. Ember let out a sharp, frantic whinny, ripping Ethan from his paralysis. She jerked again, desperate, terrified, almost slipping in the snow. Ethan stood quickly and steadied her, his heart pounding as he stared back at the frozen lake. The horse was motionless beneath the surface, preserved in a silent world of blue and white. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the bridle. He hadn't noticed it at first, but now the dark leather straps were visible through the ice, wrapped around the horse's head, and attached to the bridle, a glint of metal. A tag, something engraved, a name. Ethan's stomach twisted. He stepped closer, boots crunching on the frozen shore, straining to read the faint letters through the ice. The light was too dim, the surface too clouded by frost. But he already knew. Somehow he already knew. 2 weeks earlier, a horse had gone missing. A young gelding named Rowan, belonging to a family on the far side of the valley. Posters had gone up at the feed store, the diner, the gas station. Neighbors had searched the woods and the hills, assuming he had slipped through a broken fence or wandered off in a storm. But no one had checked the lake. Ethan swallowed hard, the cold burning his throat. "No," he whispered. "Please, no." But as the first rays of weak sunlight crept over the trees, they illuminated the tag beneath the ice, just enough for him to see the edge of a letter. R. His fingers trembled. Behind him, Ember suddenly reared, hooves striking the air, letting out a piercing, terrified scream that echoed through the snowy clearing. She wasn't looking at the lake anymore. She was looking past it. Ethan spun around. Something moved in the tree line on the far side of the lake. A shadow. Slow. Purposeful. And then it disappeared. His skin crawled with a cold deeper than winter itself. Because in that moment, Ethan knew one thing for certain. Whatever happened to that horse, it wasn't an accident. Ethan stood rooted to the snow, staring at the tree line long after the shadow had vanished. Ember trembled beneath his hand, her breath ragged, her muscles coiled like a bowstring pulled to its limit. He had felt fear before, real fear, but this was different. This was the kind that seeped inward, cold and poisonous, settling beneath the ribs where it could grow unchecked. The sun rose higher, though it did little to warm the world. A thin haze hovered over the lake, softening the harsh glint of ice. The shape beneath its surface remained clear, immovable, like a silent accusation cast in winter glass. Rowan, the missing horse whose name had been printed on posters with a cheerful font and a hopeful tone. But there was nothing hopeful here, only stillness, only the sense that something was terribly wrong, and that whatever had gone wrong hadn't finished. Ethan exhaled shakily and tugged gently on Ember's lead rope. "Come on, girl. We're leaving." She did not need to be asked twice. She fell in behind him, her steps hurried, her head constantly turning to scan the woods as if expecting the shadow to reappear at any moment. Ethan didn't look back, couldn't. The image of Rowan beneath the ice had etched itself into his mind, a frozen specter that followed him with every step. He returned to the ranch at a near jog. The snow crunched loudly beneath his boots, but the sound seemed foreign, distant, as though it belonged to someone else. The silence from the lake had followed him all the way home, settling over the property like a blanket thrown over a cage. Even the wind had quieted. Even the birds seemed absent. When he reached the barn, he led Ember inside and closed the heavy wooden door behind them, grateful for the solid barrier. The mare was sweating despite the bitter cold, steam rising from her flanks. He removed her bridle and gave her a moment to calm down, though she kept tossing her head toward the tiny window on the barn's far wall, ears pinned back. "Easy, Ember. Easy." He stroked her cheek with a trembling hand. "We're safe here." But he barely believed the words himself. He heard movement behind him, slow footsteps on the hay-strewn floor. Ethan spun around, heart hammering in his chest. It was just his ranch hand, Caleb. Caleb wiped his hands on his jeans and frowned. "You look like you saw a ghost." Ethan opened his mouth to respond, but the words wouldn't come. He wasn't ready, not yet, to speak the truth aloud. Not until he understood it. Not until he could say it without his voice breaking. Caleb raised an eyebrow. "Something happened out there?" Ethan swallowed. "You could say that." Caleb studied him, then Ember. The mare was still trembling. His expression shifted. What spooked her? Ethan hesitated, then said quietly, "There's something in the lake." Caleb snorted. "What, coyotes? It's too damn cold for that." "No," Ethan said, voice sharp. "Not coyotes." Caleb stopped wiping his hands. "Then what?" Ethan drew in a breath. "A horse, frozen beneath the ice." Caleb stared. "What?" "You heard me." "Jesus." Caleb scrubbed a hand over his jaw. "You think it's the missing gelding? The one the Strattons lost?" Ethan nodded once. Caleb swore under his breath. That'd explain why no one found him. But how the hell does a horse end up under the ice? That lake's solid as a rock. Ethan's eyes darkened. It wasn't an accident. Caleb narrowed his eyes. "You think someone?" "I think someone led him onto the ice," Ethan said, voice low. "And I think they meant for him not to come back." Caleb's mouth tightened. Who the hell would do that? Ethan didn't answer, because his thoughts were already back at the tree-line. The shadow, the slow, deliberate movement, the unmistakable feeling of being watched. He didn't know who had been there, or what they wanted, but he knew one thing with chilling certainty. They had returned to the scene. They had come back to look at what they'd done. He glanced back at Ember. The mare was calmer now, though her eyes remained fixed on the barn window, as if trying to see through the frost-clouded glass. She let out a low, uneasy rumble. "I don't think they were expecting anyone to find it," Ethan murmured. Caleb shifted uncomfortably. "What do you want to do?" "Call the sheriff," Ethan said automatically. But even as he spoke, he felt doubt creep in. Sheriff Mallory was competent, sure, but he was also methodical to a fault. He'd want to rope off the area, run forensics, wait for backup. And Ethan wasn't sure they had time. He didn't know what the shadow and the tree-line meant, but he knew danger when he sensed it. Something, or someone, was already steps ahead. But not calling the sheriff wasn't an option either. A dead horse under the ice wasn't something you kept quiet. And if Rowan had been harmed intentionally, there was no telling what might come next. "Yeah," Caleb said, as though reading Ethan's hesitation. "You need to tell him." "I will," Ethan said, "but I want to go back first." Caleb blinked. "Back?" "Ethan, you just said someone might have done this on purpose. Why the hell would you go back there?" "Because I need to know," Ethan said. "I need to see if they left anything behind. Tracks, tools, signs, anything." Caleb shook his head. "That's the sheriff's job. I'm not waiting around." Ethan grabbed his coat again, jaw set. "Rowan's owners deserve answers." "And what about you?" Caleb demanded. "You deserve not to get shot in the woods." Ethan paused long enough to meet his eyes. "I'm not going unarmed." Caleb let out a long breath and nodded. "All right, I'll go with you." "No," Ethan said sharply. "Stay here. Keep an eye on the property. On Ember." Caleb hesitated, but finally nodded. Ethan stepped out into the cold again, and the silence greeted him immediately, thick and suffocating. He walked toward his cabin on the edge of the property, opened the gun safe, and retrieved his rifle. He checked the chamber, loaded it, then slung it over his shoulder. As he stepped back outside, a gust of wind cut across the plains, stirring the snow into restless spirals that danced around his boots. He looked toward the distant line of trees. The lake lay beyond them, waiting, silent, watching. Ethan took a breath, tightened his grip on the rifle, and started toward it. Each step felt heavier than the last. The world seemed to grow colder, darker, with every yard he crossed. The sun was higher now, but it provided no warmth. It only cast long, sharp shadows across the snow, shadows that seemed to reach for him like skeletal fingers stretching from beneath a white grave. He approached the lake slowly, cautiously. Ember wasn't there to sense danger, so he relied on instinct alone. He stopped at the edge of the clearing and scanned the tree line. Nothing. No movement. No sound. But he felt it. That strange pressure in the air, as if the forest itself were holding something back. He stepped out onto the lake's edge. Rowan's form remained exactly where it had been, trapped beneath the ice, still and silent. But something was different now. Ethan felt it instantly. The ice around the horse's body, once clear and smooth, was cracked. Freshly, recently, as if someone had been here, as if someone had tried to break through. Ethan's pulse thundered in his ears. He turned sharply toward the woods. Something moved again, but this time it didn't disappear. This time it stepped out. Ethan's breath caught in his throat as the figure stepped out from between the trees, brushing aside snow-covered branches as though emerging from some other world entirely. The man was tall, dressed in a heavy black coat that swallowed his frame, his boots sinking deep into the powder with each deliberate step. He didn't hurry. He didn't hide. He simply appeared, like someone who had been waiting for the perfect moment to show himself. His face was shadowed beneath a hood lined with fur, but what Ethan could see, the hard jaw, the pale mouth drawn into a tight line, was enough to raise the hairs on the back of his neck. The stranger didn't speak at first. He just stood there, watching Ethan with a stillness that was unnatural, almost predatory. The forest behind him seemed to lean in, as if holding its breath. Ethan's fingers tightened around his rifle, though he didn't raise it yet. The cold air between them felt charged, brittle, ready to splinter. "What are you doing out here?" the man finally asked. His voice was low, steady, with a faint rasp that sounded like gravel dragged across stone. It wasn't the voice of someone caught off guard. It was the voice of someone who already knew the answer but wanted to hear it spoken aloud. Ethan didn't back down. "I could ask you the same thing." The man's gaze flicked briefly toward the lake, toward the frozen shape beneath the ice, before returning to Ethan's face. "You shouldn't be here." Ethan's jaw clenched. That horse didn't put itself under the ice. "No," the man said softly. "It didn't." The admission was so calm, so casual, that Ethan felt heat flare beneath the cold in his chest. He took a half step forward. "Do you know what happened to him?" The stranger tilted his head slightly, as though considering how much truth to reveal. "I know enough to tell you that you should turn around and go home. Walk away from this lake. Forget what you saw. It'll be better for everyone." "Everyone," Ethan echoed with disbelief. "Or just you?" The man's lips curved into something that wasn't a smile, but carried the implication of one. "You're not a stupid man. I'm glad you understand the question." Ethan raised the rifle then, slowly but firmly, leveling it at the stranger's chest. "I'm only going to ask this once. Did you have something to do with that horse's death?" The wind shifted, brushing across the lake with a long, mournful sigh. The man didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. Instead, he took one more step forward, dangerously close, and the move was so bold, so fearless, that it made Ethan's grip tighten. "Lower the rifle," the man said quietly, "before you regret it. Answer the question." The man studied him for a long moment. Ethan felt the weight of that stare like pressure against his skin, as though the stranger were measuring him, assessing whether he was a threat or merely an obstacle. When he finally spoke, the chill in his voice sank deeper than the winter air. "You don't want the truth." "Yes," Ethan said, his breath fogging in a hot burst. "I do." A strange tension flickered across the man's face then, something like annoyance mixed with a faint trace of pity. He looked again toward the ice. Rowan didn't die because he was weak. He died because he was useful. Ethan's stomach twisted. Useful to who? To the kind of people who don't appreciate questions. That sounds like a threat. "It is whatever you need it to be," the man said. "But I'll give you one last warning. Leave this lake alone. Leave the horse where he is. And do not come back. And if I don't," then, for the first time, something unmistakably dark flickered in the stranger's eyes, an edge cutting through the calm like a blade. "Then the next thing under that ice won't be a horse." The words hung between them like breath turned to ice. Before Ethan could react, before he could draw another breath, the man turned and stepped back into the trees. His black coat blended instantly with the shadows, and within moments, he was gone as though swallowed by the forest. Ethan stood motionless, staring at the spot where the stranger had disappeared, his heartbeat a heavy drum against his ribs. The silence felt oppressive now, suffocating, filled with the echo of the stranger's warning. But beneath that silence, something else pulsed, something deeper. Ethan felt it more than heard it, a faint vibration running through the ice beneath his boots. He looked down sharply, expecting to see cracks forming, water rising, something breaking through from below. But the lake remained still. Rowan's body remained motionless beneath the ice, frozen in that haunting, distorted posture. Nothing moved. Yet Ethan knew with absolute certainty that he was no longer alone. Not truly. The stranger had not acted like someone who had stumbled upon a crime scene. He had acted like someone guarding it, protecting it. And if someone was willing to kill a horse for being useful, then whatever lay beneath this frozen surface was bigger, much bigger, than any missing livestock case. Ethan backed away from the lake slowly, step by step, not turning his back until he reached the tree line. Only then did he lower his rifle, though he never loosened his grip. His breath came fast, clouding the air, and his hands had begun to shake, not from fear alone, but from a knowledge that something in those woods had just marked him. As he turned to head back toward the ranch, a sound broke through the silence. A crack, a long, sharp, echoing crack that rippled across the lake like a gunshot fired beneath glass. Ethan whipped around. A new fracture had split the ice, wide, jagged, racing outward from Rowan's frozen body. The water beneath churned faintly, dark shapes shifting in the depths. Ethan's blood ran cold. Something under the ice was moving. Rowan's body trembled almost imperceptibly, as though pushed from below. Ethan's breath froze. That wasn't possible. He stared, heart pounding, as the water beneath the ice darkened, swirling with slow, deliberate motion, as though something alive was rising. Ethan's courage faltered for the first time since stepping onto the lake. He stumbled backward, eyes locked on the shifting darkness below. And then he saw it. Another shape, larger, closer to the surface. Not a horse, not an animal at all. A human hand pressed against the underside of the ice. A hand, fingers splayed, motionless, frozen, trapped beneath the surface beside Rowan. Ethan's lungs stopped working entirely. Someone else was under that lake. And whoever they were, they had not been there when he first arrived. The stranger's warning slammed into him with brutal clarity. Leave the horse alone. Do not come back, or the next thing under the ice won't be a horse. Ethan didn't think. He ran. He tore through the trees with adrenaline burning through his veins, branches whipping his jacket and snow exploding beneath his boots. He didn't stop, didn't breathe, didn't look back. Not even when the woods behind him echoed with another crack from the lake, sharper, louder, like ice splitting open. When he finally reached the ranch, stumbling and gasping for breath, Caleb burst out of the barn. "Ethan, what happened? Where the hell? Get inside," Ethan choked out. "Now, lock the doors." "Why? What's? Just do it." Caleb hesitated for half a second too long. Ethan grabbed his arm, gripping hard enough to leave bruises. "There's a body under the ice," he said, voice shaking. "And it wasn't there this morning." Caleb's eyes widened. "Ethan," he whispered, "what did you find out there?" Ethan stared past him toward the distant line of trees and the silent lake beyond them. "Not what?" he said. "Who?" Ethan barely slept that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that pale, rigid hand pressed against the underside of the ice, fingers spread as though reaching for him, begging or warning or accusing. He didn't know which. When the wind rattled the windows, he heard the lake cracking. When the barn door creaked under its own weight, he heard the stranger's voice telling him to walk away. And when the silence grew too deep, too still, he heard the faint muffled thud of something knocking from beneath a frozen surface. By dawn, he had stopped pretending he would rest at all. He rose before the sun, layered himself in cold, stiffened clothes, and walked out onto the porch where the frost glistened like a dusting of crushed glass over the rails. The air carried that morning hush typical of their valley in winter, the kind of silence that felt almost sacred, yet now it carried an edge like a blade hidden in velvet. Caleb stepped out behind him, bleary-eyed but alert. "You going back up there?" he said, not asked. Ethan inhaled slowly. His breath fogged into the pale dawn light. "I don't have a choice." "You always have a choice," Caleb muttered, rubbing his hands together. "It's whether it's a smart one that's in question." Ethan didn't respond. They saddled their horses in near total silence. Dakota, stamping restlessly as though he could sense Ethan's turmoil. The gelding didn't like the direction they were heading, not one bit. His ears flicked back every time Ethan gathered the reins. Animals were sensitive to tension, sure, but Dakota had never reacted like this before, not even on hunts where wolves had followed them. Caleb hesitated beside him. "If your horse doesn't want to go," Ethan met his brother's eyes, "then it means we're heading exactly where we need to." They took the ridge trail, snow crunching under the horse's hooves, frost clinging to the brush like feathers of ice. The sky was clear, washed with early pinks and faint lavender, but a tension rode beneath its beauty, a heaviness, as though the day itself understood something was wrong. Ethan felt the shift the moment they reached the tree-line near the lake. The air grew colder, unnaturally so. Even Dakota slowed, placing each step with caution. Caleb scanned the woods. "You feel that?" "Yeah," Ethan murmured, "like something's watching us." As they came to the edge of the frozen water, Ethan's heart lurched. The fractures in the ice were worse. Much worse. A spiderweb of new cracks spread from the center outward like veins through frosted glass. The hole where Rowan's body lay beneath the surface had widened. And the hand was closer to the surface than yesterday. Much closer. Caleb exhaled sharply, his breath catching. "Jesus, Ethan!" Ethan slid off Dakota, his boots crunching into the snow. He moved cautiously toward the water's edge, every instinct screaming at him to keep back. But something else, some deeper, inexplicable pull, compelled him forward. Caleb grabbed his arm. "What if it's a trick? What if that man came back? Then we'll deal with him," Ethan said, though his voice lacked the certainty he wished it carried. He knelt at the rim of the cracked ice, leaning close enough to see the pale shape beneath. The hand rested palm up now, as though offering something he couldn't see. And next to it, partially obscured by swirling frost and snow dust, Ethan finally noticed something he had missed before. A sleeve. A coat sleeve. Dark. Heavy. Thick winter fabric. The same kind of coat the stranger had been wearing. Ethan jerked back. "No," he whispered. "It can't be." Caleb followed his gaze and went still, his face draining of color. "You think that's him? It looks like the same coat. But how would he get under the ice?" "I don't know." Caleb swallowed hard. Unless he was never above it. The idea hit Ethan like a blow. But before he could say anything, the forest behind them shifted. Not a twig snapping, not a squirrel darting, something heavier, something deliberate. Both men turned at once. The stranger stepped out from behind the same cluster of pines as the night before. That same controlled ease in his stride, that same unnerving calm. Only this time, his hood was down, and the face exposed to the cold. The face he revealed did not match the one beneath the ice. The man in front of them was very much alive, and smiling. "You came back," he said softly. "I told you not to." Caleb raised his rifle immediately. Ethan didn't move, frozen not by fear, but by shock at the impossibility before him. "Who is that under the ice?" Ethan demanded. The man didn't look, didn't need to. Someone who should have stayed forgotten. "Who?" Ethan snapped. "Give me a name." The stranger finally turned his eyes toward the frozen lake, and for the first time since Ethan had met him, something flickered beneath his calm expression. Regret, maybe, or the ghost of remorse. "He's my brother." Caleb's grip on his rifle faltered. Ethan felt his stomach twist. "Your brother?" "Twin," the man clarified, his voice flattening. "Same face, same blood, but not the same man." Ethan stared at him. What happened to him? He chose a path that led him somewhere cold. The words were vague, cryptic, but there was a heaviness to them that carried pain. Real pain. Ethan's voice hardened, and the horse. The man's jaw tightened. Rowan got in the way. In the way of what? The stranger stepped forward, so slowly it made the hair rise along Ethan's arms. You don't understand what you've walked into. Then make me understand, Ethan hissed. The stranger opened his mouth to speak, then stopped. His eyes snapped toward the ice. Something beneath it moved, something larger than before. Caleb muttered a sharp curse. The cracks spread like lightning beneath their boots. A deep, resonant thud echoed from the center of the lake, like something heavy striking the underside of the ice. Once, twice, the stranger took a step back. Get away from the water. Ethan didn't move. Is that your brother? It's not my brother anymore. The thudding grew louder, more violent, shaking loose flakes of ice along the surface. Caleb backed up toward the tree-line, raising the rifle. What the hell does that mean? The ice exploded. A plume of freezing water shot upward, and Ethan threw his arms over his face as shards of shattered ice rained around him. The horses screamed and reared, trying to bolt. And through the geyser of ruptured water and jagged ice, a shape surged upward. Dark, thrashing, half-human, half-wild aberration of something that once had a face like a stranger's, but now was distorted by frostbite, rot, and something far worse than decay. Caleb shouted Ethan's name. Dakota tore free into the trees. Ethan stumbled backward, slipping in the slush as the creature dragged itself onto the fractured surface, limbs jerking unnaturally, fingers scraping grooves into the ice. Its eyes, white, clouded, hollow, locked onto Ethan with a recognition that chilled him deeper than the winter wind ever could. He didn't understand how he knew. He didn't understand why he felt it. But some part of him, some ancient and primal part, understood the truth in an instant. This thing had been waiting for him. The stranger lunged, grabbing Ethan's arm and hauling him backward. Run! Ethan stared at the creature, rooted by horror. What is he? My brother, the stranger said, voice breaking, and a mistake that should have stayed buried. The creature screamed, a sound like cracking ice mixed with animal anguish, and charged. Ethan ran, through snow, through trees, through branches that clawed his jacket and tore his skin. The stranger kept pace beside him, breath ragged, boots sliding across frozen earth. The creature behind them crashed through brush with unnerving strength, its limbs whipping through branches as though they were nothing. Caleb fired a shot, and the creature didn't slow. Ethan's heart hammered in his chest, breath tearing through his lungs like fire in the freezing air. But through the panic and the dread and the pounding chaos, only one thought echoed in his mind, loud enough to drown out everything else. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't random. Rowan hadn't been found by chance. The creature beneath the ice had been waiting for someone, and Ethan now understood with perfect, killing clarity that someone was him. Ethan didn't remember how far he ran or how many times his boots slipped out from under him as he tore through the trees, branches lashing his face and the cold slicing into his lungs like broken glass. All he knew was the sound behind him, the sickening crackle of ice and the grotesque scrape of something human-shaped dragging itself across frozen ground, growing closer with every breath he dared to take. Snow exploded around him as he pushed through a thicket, his jacket ripping on a jagged branch. Caleb's shouts echoed somewhere behind him, mixing with the ragged gasps of the stranger keeping pace beside him. But the creature's cries, those were the loudest. They weren't screams. They were something worse. Something like the wind howling through a hollow skull. Something like pain trying to speak. Something that had learned to mimic a voice, but forgotten what humanity sounded like. It was only when Ethan broke through the tree-line and stumbled into a clearing that he finally collapsed to his knees, gasping, his muscles burning and shaking under him. The stranger grabbed him by the arm, yanking him to his feet again. Don't stop, he hissed. If you stop, you die. We can't outrun it forever. Ethan choked. The stranger stared at him, frost gathering on his lashes. We don't have to outrun it. We just have to make it to the cabin. Ethan's blood turned cold. What cabin? The one my brother died in. It wasn't reassurance. It wasn't hope. But it was the only path they had left. The creature's howl ripped through the forest like the splitting of a mountain. Caleb burst into the clearing seconds later, panting, cheeks white with terror. It's gaining. Ethan, move. They ran again, feet pounding the snow in a desperate rhythm that barely kept them ahead of the pursuit. The sky above them darkened with rolling clouds, as if the weather itself understood the nightmare unfolding below. The woods grew denser, colder, the air thick with a tension so heavy it seemed to slow the world around them. Every shadow looked like it might hold the creature. Every gust of wind sounded like its breath on the back of Ethan's neck. The stranger led them through a twisting path of dead brush and narrow trails until they reached a part of the forest that felt wrong. Too quiet, too isolated, as though the world had recoiled from it. And then Ethan saw it. A small, rotting cabin half buried beneath snow-heavy pines, its roof sagging under winter's weight. The door hung crookedly from one hinge, and frost covered the windows in thick, opaque sheets. Inside, the stranger ordered, "Hurry!" They stumbled through the doorway, and the stranger slammed the door shut behind them. Caleb pushed a broken table against it for good measure. Ethan stared around the cabin, chest heaving. It smelled of mold, old wood, and something faintly metallic, something like dry blood. "This is where he died?" He managed. The stranger nodded. "Where he should have stayed. What happened to him?" Ethan pressed, voice cracking. Why is he like that?" The stranger exhaled, the weight of it shaking the cabin's stale air. "He disappeared 5 years ago. We searched for him for weeks. Then one day I found him here, frozen dead, lying on the floor." He paused, jaw tightening. But he didn't stay dead. A violent crash slammed into the door, rattling the entire cabin. Caleb stumbled back, raising his rifle with trembling hands. Ethan swore under his breath. "It tracked us here." "Of course it did," the stranger said quietly. "It always finds what it's tied to." Ethan turned to him sharply. "Tied to? What does that mean?" The stranger's eyes met his, cold and hollow. "You saw it, didn't you?" "Saw what?" Another crash shook the cabin, louder this time, splintering the top of the doorframe. Snow drifted in through the widening crack. The stranger stepped closer, his voice dropping to a low, steady murmur. "When you saw the hand under the ice, did it reach for you?" Ethan's breath caught. "Yes." "Did you feel something? Pulling you? Calling you?" Ethan opened his mouth, but no sound came. Because yes, he had felt it. At the lake, in the forest. Even now, a wait, a whisper, a sense that the creature wasn't chasing him at random. It was following something. Something it recognized. Something it needed. "What does it want from me?" Ethan finally whispered. The stranger's answer came like a death sentence. "Your warmth." Ethan froze. Caleb looked between them in confusion. "What the hell does that mean?" "It isn't alive," the stranger said. "Not fully. It survives by stealing warmth from animals, from people, from anything it can reach." The lake kept it dormant. But when Rowan broke through the ice, his voice cracked. "My brother woke up hungry." Ethan felt the room tilt around him. "So the horse kept it trapped beneath the ice. Until you came along." Another crash, this one followed by an inhuman shriek, tore through the cabin walls. The door split at the top, wood cracking as a pale, frostbitten hand forced its way through, fingers clawing at the air. Caleb screamed, firing a shot through the gap. The creature recoiled, but only for a heartbeat, then slammed its weight against the door again. The hinges buckled. "We need a way out," Caleb yelled. The stranger shook his head. "There is no way out." The words hit Ethan like ice water. "What?" "There's only a way through." He stepped forward, gripping Ethan's jacket. It came for you because you woke it, because you went near the lake, because you touched the ice. So what does it want me to do, Di? No, the stranger whispered. It wants what it always wanted, to finish what happened here 5 years ago. Another hand punched through the door, then another. Wood splintered. The door gave way in a shower of snow and shards. And the creature, what was left of the stranger's brother, dragged itself into the cabin. Its skin was white as snow, stretched tight over bones. Frost clung to its eyebrows, its lashes, its hair. Its lips were cracked and purple-blue, and its eyes were two swirling orbs of fogged, milky white. It crawled like something that had forgotten how to walk, but remembered enough to kill. Caleb fired again. The bullet lodged in its shoulder. It didn't even flinch. The stranger pushed Ethan behind him. Stay back. The creature lunged. Caleb screamed. The stranger collided with it, shoving it to the floor, grappling with limbs that moved with unnatural, jerking strength. The cabin shook with the violence of their struggle. Furniture toppling, frost spreading across the floorboards as the creature's breath filled the room with a death-cold mist. Ethan felt something shift inside himself. A pull, a cold thread linking him to the creature. His vision blurred, his breath caught, and he understood. It wasn't the stranger's brother who had drowned here. It was both of them. One had pulled the other under. One had survived long enough to be found. One had been frozen beneath the ice, and one had lived haunted by it. Ethan felt the truth slam into him like a hammer. The creature wasn't tied to the stranger. It was tied to the one who had seen its body, the one who had touched the ice above it, the one who had felt the pull. It was tied to Ethan. He stumbled forward, shouting, "Stop! Stop fighting it!" Caleb whirled. "Ethan, what are you doing?" The creature turned its fogged eyes toward him, trembling, reaching for him like the hand under the ice. Ethan stepped closer. Caleb shouted in horror, "Ethan, no." The stranger froze mid-struggle, staring at him. "What are you doing?" Ethan's eyes filled with tears as the creature stretched its broken fingers toward him. "It isn't after you," Ethan whispered. "It's after me." The creature let out a sound, soft, almost human. "Asobi." Ethan reached out, his fingers trembling. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry." His fingertips brushed the creature's icy skin. The room vanished into white. Silence swallowed everything. And then, slowly, the creature stilled. Its limbs stopped jerking. Its breath stopped fogging the air. It stared up at Ethan with an expression that was no longer hunger, no longer rage, no longer lost, but relief. It closed its eyes and crumbled like frost beneath sunlight. The stranger fell to his knees, staring at the empty boards. Caleb sank against the wall, shaking. Ethan stood, trembling in the falling snow dust of what remained of the creature, tears burning his frozen cheeks. The cabin grew warmer, quiet, peaceful. The stranger whispered, voice breaking, "You freed him." Ethan didn't answer. He just collapsed to his knees and let himself cry. The storm outside began to clear. Dawn broke across the trees, soft and gold, touching the world with light again. Ethan remained in the cabin until the warmth finally reached him. And for the first time since stepping onto that frozen lake, he felt the cold begin to let him go.